Hi, and welcome to the second module in EDU510. In this module, we'll be moving on to some foundational concepts in doing educational research in more detail than we've had a chance to do so up till now. You'll be reading two chapters from Creswell and Guterman. They're very detailed, but very helpful chapters. At this stage, I would read for key information and not get lost in the weeds of details. You'll be able to return to these readings later when you're actually doing your own research or when you're putting together your literature review and so on. So I would suggest that you read them for those key ideas that you'll be able to note so that you'll know where to go back to get good information. You'll also be reading two additional readings that you'll be able to access under the tab labeled Module 2. And once you click that tab, look for the tab that says Required Readings, and there you'll find a reference list with the electronic links to additional readings and videos outside the text. Both McGolden and Weems and Hostetler deal with ethics from both a practical and philosophical perspective. The Bowl video is an excellent exploration of the complexity of ethical engagement with Indigenous peoples when doing research. And Ekstrom raises some interesting key questions about knowledge in the age of Google and the possibilities or even impossibilities of impartiality and unbiased research, whether we're talking about quantitative or qualitative research. In addition to the readings listed here, you'll be participating in the forum as well as completing your statement of the research problem assignment. In other words, this is a busy module, and so staying on top of it will be important. But remember that I'm here to support you in doing so. And just a note, this is something perhaps a little different than what you've done in other courses. In addition to submitting your initial response to the forum, which is marked in Module 2, and then, that being a place where you'll be able to respond to others and they can respond to your initial response, I would ask you as well to cut and paste your initial response that you put in the forum group in Module 2 and submit it to submit your assignments. This does a couple of things. First of all, it triggers the process on eClass whereby I can I can put my comments and put your mark right into eClass rather than having to send out a separate email with that information. It also just means that you'll be able to access all of the information about all of your assignments in the same place. So this is something we're trying with this course. If you find this a little onerous, then let me know and so that we can note that for next time. But we're going to try this time and just see whether it works and if people remember to do it and that sort of thing. And that will then allow us to make sure that your marks are available in a more user-friendly sort of way. And unfortunately, it means that we have to do it this way. That is, you cut and paste and put it in Submit Your Assignments. But you'll continue with the forum as usual in the module. So I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, let me know. All right. So I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on Creswell and Guterman because the information is explained clearly, and both chapters 3 and 4 will be ones that you'll go back to as you move forward with your research in the remainder of the program, as I've suggested already. Chapter 3 will be helpful to you in the shorter term for your literature review assignments, and Chapter 4 will be very helpful as additional information during this module for your research problem statement assignment, although the assignment is actually based on the discussion about research questions in Chapter 2, and all of that information is in the description of the assignment. In Chapter 3, Creswell and Guterman discuss the literature review and consider the practical steps in identifying the focus for your research, locating literature, critically evaluating and selecting the literature you use for your research, then organizing and writing up your literature review. The literature review enables us to learn what is already known about the phenomenon we wish to explore. The key terms for your research will come out of a potential title and preliminary research focus or question. Once you put together some key terms, you can begin to locate the literature that's available. And here I would suggest get to know your librarian. They'll be your best friend. You can either do that in person or electronically. Also get to know the library website. But see the cautionary notes in the instructor notes on eClass for this module, as well as consider Ekstrom's video discussion. about the reliability of sources. In order to find reliable and useful literature, use reliable and useful sources, and your library is going to be the best way to do that. Google is sometimes helpful as perhaps as a stepping stone, and then you might want to look that up in the library and make sure that it comes from a reputable peer-reviewed journal, for example. So you're going to evaluate the quality of the literature you are identifying as well as its value to your study. In addition to the librarians, explore and use the information on the library page. Some of the questions you need to ask include, is the article from a legitimate peer-reviewed journal? So when you, for example, you call up an article using one of the search engines, oftentimes you will be able to see whether it's a peer-reviewed journal in the information that's provided on the library site. Is this of value to my study? You'll need to evaluate whether this article, which may be very worthy and actually really interesting, really enhances your understanding of your research problem or question, or adds background that's important to your study. So those are questions you'll need to evaluate for yourself. Then you need to organize the literature, and Creswell has some ideas about doing so that are useful. The annotated literature review assignment that's upcoming in Module 3 will be helpful in enabling you to begin to actually go through this process in a more limited way, and will enable you to explore one way of writing up an annotation for each of the sources that you find as useful, as well as a synthesis across the various literatures that you've chosen. This assignment will be helpful in understanding this important part of the research process, including for your eventual research project. Even if you change your area of inquiry, it's going to be a helpful process for you to go through. So you'll actually be doing this yourself in a somewhat limited way so that you can actually experience this very important process that's a part of research. And Creswell and Guterman talk about it in detail around both quantitative studies and qualitative studies. Before you begin researching, as they suggest, it's essential to determine precisely what it is that this study will do. In Chapter 4, the authors talk about purpose statements, research questions, hypotheses, and objectives, and how to differentiate between them and treat them appropriately, whether they're quantitative or qualitative studies. And as you'll note in what they say and what they write about, each of these will require different approaches in terms of how you approach writing up your research question. All right, McGold and Weems' article introduces an essential part of doing research, ethics. It's an interesting and accessible article and takes on the important ethical dilemmas that researchers encounter when working with human or animal subjects. If you've done any research, you're well aware of the many ethical issues they raise, and if you haven't, it's an excellent article for ensuring that new researchers are attuned to the ethics of doing research, particularly in qualitative research. Not that they don't emerge in quantitative work, because they certainly do. And Hostetler gives some examples of that. But the effects tend to be muted by the less direct interactions between researcher and subject. McGold and Weems focus in particular on qualitative research in which you are building relationships of trust between the researcher and those being researched. And that relationship raises some very significant ethical dilemmas. You'll learn about the institutional ethics requirements in the course you must complete online before you finish your program. But each institution, boards of education, universities, colleges, many businesses, even communities in which you might be engaged in research, for example, Indigenous communities, may have or do have their own ethical guidelines and review processes that must be considered, and your research must be approved before it can proceed. For example, in MES, many of your projects will be covered by a blanket ethics approval if it meets certain conditions, but if it doesn't, an individual ethics application would need to be completed. I have to complete an ethics application for all of the research that I've done in whichever institution I've been a part of. The ethics board at the university is a working committee, at any university, is a working committee that must approve any research that uses human subjects. Therefore, Everyone who is researching human subjects must have their research approved based on the university criteria. And the university's criteria are set in response to criteria set by national bodies. Approvals are regularly monitored, and universities take this process very seriously. But having an ethics application approved doesn't end the ethical responsibility you hold as a researcher. As you embark on a qualitative study, your relationship with participants is premised on trust. But the nature of qualitative research is that you are building knowledge together, so you don't know with certainty what might emerge. Therefore, the respondent, that is, the person being researched, trusts that you will take care in the research that you do together. So McGold and Weems go into some of the dilemmas that have come up in their research that exemplify the kinds of quandaries all qualitative researchers have encountered at one time or another. For example, gatekeepers, for example, the superintendent or principal or respondents, the teachers or parents, may be really excited that you want to research their work or school or whatever, and have said yes before you have fully disclosed possible risks. Do you stop disclosing, or do you continue with telling them about possible negative effects? Well, of course you disclosed. There may be harm to the broader community as well if your research becomes public and human subjects can be identified. That is, you might have promised them that they will not be identified, but someone is able, because of the way the project is written up, they may be able to identify which school you're talking about, or which teacher you're talking about. Or the researcher may be used by others to the detriment of the community, and we've seen many examples of this, particularly in First Nations communities, as Bowl demonstrates in her video. Therefore, as researchers, we have to act ethically, with sensitivity, and do what we can to prevent harm. And there's potential harm to the researcher as well. The actual emotional labor of working through these issues can be emotionally wearing, or if you make the wrong decision, your reputation may be affected. Revelations may trigger psychologically harmful responses, and so on. So as we think through what may happen during the research process, we need to think about any potential harms to ourselves and to others. Pre-thinking this during the ethics process means that you and participants are prepared for most eventualities, and sensitivity and a relationship of mutual trust helps if something unexpected arises. The key is to take account of the power issues. Who has the power to speak? Who doesn't? And how is that organized? Who has the power to reveal or conceal what is said? And how can power relationships be mediated to better serve everyone's interest so that unforeseen harm does not occur? So, for example, if I've done interviews with a series of participants, I may want to share my transcripts of those interviews with them so that they can go through and say, this is something I'd rather not be said because a certain harm may be attached to it. So these are the ways in which these difficulties can be mitigated. And of course, in all of this, you're balancing the harm potential with the possibility to do meaningful research. So McGold and Weems use examples from their own research to illustrate the complex negotiations that may be a part of ethical qualitative research, and in doing so, offer us an instructive article that expands our understanding of the complex nature of ethical research. This may sound complicated and even a bit scary, and it is at times, but a researcher who is sensitive to the needs of the respondents thinks about mitigating possible harms ahead of time and takes account of power relations in their planning can proceed with continued sensitivity and confidence that ethical issues have been attended to responsibly. And McGold and Weems give us some possibilities to consider in order to mitigate the possibility of harm. So they suggest integrating ethical considerations into the planning process, knowing that you can't anticipate everything that's going to happen before it does. You can forewarn participants of possible harm, and usually that's done in the ethics application and the information that goes out to participants itself. You can periodically ask yourself the question, are my actions harming anyone else? Now, this shouldn't cause you to fall into paralysis, that is, oh my gosh, I might cause some harm, so I better not do that. But rather, to think about, if that might be the case, what can I do to ensure that that isn't the case? and that will allow you to continue with your research without any harmful effects. Get to know the context where you conduct research and allow the context to guide ethical decisions. So again, this would be important, for example, in Indigenous communities, in a minority ethnic community, in a community where that speaks a different language or has different cultural habits or preferences. Recognize that research writing is a political process, that in fact power relations can be quite uneven. And so ensuring that the politics of the situation is considered is important. You need to demonstrate sensitivity toward the rights of respondents and the integrity of the data while thinking carefully about suggestions to sugarcoat or sanitize findings to soften real or perceived harm to respondents. And this comes up sometimes, for example, when research is being done in a business community, and I know of some examples of this, where the findings in actual fact don't show that business to be a stellar citizen of the community, or there's some practices that they would rather not that their competitors know about, and so on. So as unless it's in the research agreement that you've signed together, that's a part of the ethics, where they have the right to say yes or no, you may have to make a decision based on ethical considerations around whether you're going to go ahead and include that information or whether you're not going to. And last, we have the Hostetler article, which I really like this article, in which he considers what is good research. Up until now, our readings, for example, Creswell and Guterman, have suggested that good research is research that is methodologically supportable, and that's understandable and important. That is, it's something that we could recommend as being done correctly or corresponds to best research practice. Sort of like beginning teachers are most concerned about how they actually do the work and whether it's justifiable what they're doing. But Hostetler asked the question, what is good research? From the perspective of an education philosopher whose research specialization is the study of ethics. And he makes a statement near the end of the paper that summarizes his discussion and raises broader possibilities for research in a larger philosophical sense. He writes, as education researchers, we have a particular obligation and opportunity to take a leading role in seeing that the research that is done is truly good research. As we do our work, we need to think beyond questions of how we will study students or analyze school policies. We need to think about how we can make life better for people. So there's a broader question underneath what it is that we're doing. We need to think beyond our taken for granted ideas of well-being and what is good, and make those ideas the objects of serious communal inquiry. Serving people's well-being is a great challenge, but it is also our greatest calling. And in pursuing that calling, he offers some significant fodder for our discussions in Module 2, and the modules that will follow for that matter. So I hope you found this video helpful in framing some of the responsibilities, issues, and dilemmas of doing good research. And of course, your readings will flesh out these ideas in very important ways. As always, if you have questions about the readings or the assignments, I welcome your inquiries. All the best.